Welcome to the Working Genius Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host, joined by Tracy and Beau. How are you guys doing?
Today, we are doing great.
I'm also doing really well. I love getting to talk about working genius.
Yeah, it is darn fun. I mean, we talk about it all the time on planes, at church, at school, at work. It's just really fun to talk about this. Cody's not here with us. Cody broke his leg skiing and he's recuperating. We're praying for Cody. It's painful, but we're glad he's going to be okay. You know what we're going to do right now? We're going to do a unpaid commercial. You know, do we do unpaid commercials on this podcast?
I don't think we do, but let's do one today.
We're going to do one today for people that work in paramedics, EMTs, EMS world. Karen, your son is an EMT, or he's a paramedic. Yeah. And Cody got dragged down a mountain by an EMT paramedic and taken to the hospital. These are people that all of us in our lives have been taken care of at one time or another. And they're awesome. And we appreciate them. They're like the first doctor on the scene. They're not a doctor, but they are a doctor. And they see some of the hardest stuff and deal with the most dangerous situations. So we want to say thank you to all of those wonderful people. All right. And we hope Cody feels better soon. All right. We got Matt and Karen in studio here today. Tracy, what's our topic?
Today, our topic is you deserve the right job.
That's right. We really thought about this, but what to call this. But every human being deserves to find the right job, not a good job, because what is a good job? The right job. And this is so important that we don't settle or that we don't find an excuse for taking a job that doesn't fit us, because the cost of doing that is really high. And Matt said something before we started. Hey, there's some people in the world who have to do a job just to have a job and have an income, and it's not a great fit. And we get that. We really get that. There's people for years that have been coal miners and done other things because that's all there was to do in their town, and they had to put food on the table. But the truth is, for most of us, taking the wrong job is not the right decision. And that's what we want to talk about today.
Pat, you were telling us a story about why this is on the front of mind for you today.
Right. So I had the opportunity last week to do something really fun. I was at a university, Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama, War Eagle, where my son goes to school. And I had the chance to teach a couple undergraduate courses and a graduate course. And I talked about organizational health and teamwork and working genius. And I was with one of the undergrad classes, and I had them pull out their phones and do the assessment right there in class. Took them 10 minutes. And then I would debrief with various students what their working genius was. And this one young guy in the front row told me that he was a WE, Wonder and Enablement, which is the idealistic supporter. Is that right? That we call him? And he was a double responsive, in working genius. He wasn't a disruptive. And then I said, so you told me you have a job lined up. He said, yes. And I said, what is it? And he goes, I'm going to be doing cold call sales. And I stood there and I thought, oh, what do I say? And I thought, well, I have to tell. I don't want to be negative, but I can't not tell him the truth. And I said to the young man, I can't remember his name. I said, this is going to be hard for you. Cold called sales for somebody like you, because he acknowledged that he really was Wonder and Enablement. And that is not the kind of person that likes to disrupt and push and get the deal closed and break down the door. And I said, either you're going to have to go to work every day and do counterintuitive things and push through things, or this just might not be the right job for you. And I said to him, I'm sorry to tell you that, but it's better to hear this now than 2 years from now, because then there might be some difficult things that have happened.
I'm so curious what was going through his head. As a wanderer, he's probably asking a lot of questions in his head. I think a lot of times we don't then pause to rediscern things. We don't pause to ask the question, like, is this really what's going to be best for me? So, Pat, for that individual, what do you encourage them to do? Do you say, hey, go back to the person who hired you and tell them about your genius and see if there's another role? Do you tell them you should start looking in, like, if you were to give more career coaching to that person right then, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I tried to encourage him and say, and I really wanted to make sure that his assessment was correct. And it usually is. And he was like, yep, that's me. I'm thoughtful and I like to help people and I like to come alongside. And so I really pushed on that. And then he's still like 5 months away from starting his job. So he has time to look for something else. But what I would say is, and I should contact that professor and say, find that guy that was in the front row. And here's the advice. And that's go back to the place first that hired you and say, listen, this is what I'm best at. This is what gives me joy and energy. I don't think I'm going to love doing that job. Is there something else that I could do there using the skills I have? Is there another role that would better fit me? Oftentimes there is, and all a hiring manager needs to understand is who you are. So I would have him go do that. And then if they said, no, we're hiring 30 guys to do, or 30 people to do cold call sales, this is all we're hiring for, I would just encourage him to not feel at all like a failure for saying, I'm going to go out and start my search using my working genius as a guide to what I'm going to look for. So that's probably what I would tell you, Beau.
And, we're not to the place in the world yet where people are posting regularly what geniuses they're looking for in a particular job. And we're going to get there. We're going to galvanize the world to get there, Pat. I'm curious, and Tracy, I'd love to hear you weigh in on this too. Is there a question as a job seeker that you could ask, somebody in an interview or a potential employer that would help you discover if they're looking for your genius?
I think so.
What would you ask them?
Okay, so let me tell you a quick story about a guy. There was a guy that called us, this was almost 2 years ago, who was going into a performance review. So it's not an interview, but it's not unlike that. And he knew it was going to be bad. He had not had a good period, and he wasn't doing very well in his job. And before they started talking about his performance, he just said, can I show you what my working genius is? And they looked at it and said, well, it's no wonder you're not doing very well in this job. Let's find a job for you. Oh, look at this job. We have a job right over here that you'd be great at. And the guy told us he got promoted. It was the best $25 he ever spent. And the point is, you should go into an interview and say, hey, I'm so glad you're interviewing me. I appreciate that. Let me tell you what I'm really best at, and what I'm pretty good at, and what I'm terrible at. And then you can help me figure out whether or not this would be a good fit.
Wow.
And I think you can do that. And companies will be really glad to say, hey, I really like you. If I think of anything else, but you would be terrible for this job, but that doesn't make you a bad person.
Yeah, and I know I've said this many times on this podcast before, but I really do think that we need to do a better job at describing the work we are hiring for. Yeah. So we need to do a better job at writing job descriptions. And as a job seeker, if I knew that there were companies out there that really got this, I could look at a job description and say, hey, that job is for me, or hey, this is not the one. So focus on job descriptions.
We just hired a guy in our office, Joel. He's on day 3 today. And so much of what we did is we said, what do we want him to do? And we fell in love with the guy. He's just such a wonderful guy. But we thought, hey, it's one thing to fall in love with him. It's another thing to put him in a job where he's going to be miserable. And that does nobody any good, most certainly not him. So we then had to figure out, do his joys and sources of energy align with what we're going to ask him to do? And that's when we could actually do him a favor by hiring him, and do ourselves a favor, rather than put him in a situation to be miserable around people that loved him.
I love what both of you are saying. And Pat, what I think you're saying is, if you believe that you deserve the right job, it's up to you to be able to go find that job and be able to articulate, hey, here's what I bring to the table. And now, I know myself, people are so attracted to employees and potential employees who know themselves. And to be able to say, I also want to know, what do you expect from me? What do you need from me? Because I want to know if I'm going to be able to meet that expectation or not. And Tracy, on the flip side, for us as employers hiring people, it brings so much dignity to people to care about that their work would bring them joy and energy. And it's not that hard. It's just not that hard to be able to add that into the conversation as we're interviewing people and even putting it into their job descriptions.
Yeah. You know what? I just thought of something. It just occurred to me. When you apply for a job and take a job, one of the things you should ask yourself is, can I be successful? You should never take a job where the probability of your success is really low. Because what's going to happen is you're not going to enjoy the time there. You're probably going to get depressed. You're not going to walk away with a great recommendation, and you're going to leave with a lack of confidence. Why would anybody want to walk into any situation where they couldn't succeed? And what we know now is if you're doing things that are in your frustration or that give you no outlet for your genius, that's actually a recipe for failure. And so your ability to talk yourself into a job like that is really a skill you don't want to have.
That's so true. And oftentimes what happens is we will then get stuck in that lane. So if we talk ourselves into a role, we will get stuck in that role and imagine an entire career having that misfit, essentially.
Yeah, I've met people in my life who've been a lawyer and not just law, but any other profession. They're like, yeah, I'm 15 years into this. And they're like, no, I don't like it. But, you
That's
know,
so tragic.
I'm down the road in it. And it's like, oh, no. And what I just tell them is you can change. You can do it right now because, you know, the benefits of finding that job that you give you joy and energy are so much greater than whatever you think the pay is or your career path. It's you got to find that. You deserve that. You deserve to hold out for the right job. Not the perfect job, but a job that at least allows you to experience some joy and energy.
Yeah. You know, I'm sitting here thinking about the vast majority of future employees are currently employed somewhere. So the people who are looking for the right job have a job right now. And if we just flip this on its head a little bit and said, they deserve the right job. It's a very short, simple, it's not always easy conversation to be able to say, are you working in your genius right now? Is the work that you're doing for our team bringing you joy and energy? And I think as managers, that's sort of intimidating because we're going to upset this apple cart or open this can of worms. But the truth is a whole lot of the people that are on your teams are thinking about leaving, right? And they would probably love to be able to stay if they were able to do work that was in their genius.
That's a great point. It's a great point to think like if 70% or 50% of people in the world are not in jobs that align with their genius, don't make the people in your organization that are like that have to leave to figure it out. Good people that are not aligned with their genius should be, that's a really good point. Do you have to hire them from the outside or can you figure that out from within? Karen just wrote me a note that kind of blew me away. At first I didn't understand it. She said, where does expertise fit into this? And what's interesting is it's really a bad idea to get 10 years of expertise doing something you don't like and then feel like, well, I got to keep using it. So the earlier you can get into a lane of doing what you love, the more that you're going to build up expertise in a field that you're going to want to use. And even if you do have 10 years of expertise in the wrong thing, walk away from it. It's just not worth trying to do that. I heard a story recently. I can't remember the guy who told me. It was so great. It was an impressive guy. I don't remember if it was on a podcast that I was on or if I met him someplace at a conference, but he said he was in the wrong job and he was really successful and he was making great money. And somebody finally said, what's this doing to you? And he was a stockbroker, I think. But he was really doing well. And so he decided he was going to quit. And he called his dad. And this reminds me of my dad, God rest his soul, because he was like, well, don't leave. Look how well you're doing. He goes, but Dad, I'm miserable. And his dad said, can't you be miserable for 5 more years? Think about how much money you could make. The guy quit. He went to work in construction for a while, reestablished his connection to what he loved. And now he's wildly successful doing something, but in an area that gives him joy and energy.
You know, Pat, you told that, or you made the reference to a lawyer, and it made me think of a friend of mine who works at a big, successful law firm in the South. And a lot of the people around him, he looked around, he took the working genius. And he looked around and he's like, this whole law firm is full of galvanizers. Everybody's galvanizing people to come work on their project and full of a lot of tenacity, being able to get into the weeds and get things across the finish line. He took working genius and he's like, this is why I'm so burned out, is he is a DE, discernment enablement. He thought about quitting. He thought maybe law isn't for me. I'm so tired of the galvanizing tenacity type work. And I said, hey, before you quit, what if you just went to your boss and just did this very thing? Tell him a little bit about who you are and put yourself in that boss's shoes. You've got an army full of people who are all wired the same way. And we know that all work is 6-letter work. Every job is a 6-letter job. You need some people at your law firm who have the genius of wonder and discernment and invention and enablement. But it attracted, for this law firm in particular, a lot of the same letters, a lot of the same geniuses. And he went in kind of expecting to have to put in his 2 weeks notice. And his boss was like, thank God. We've been wondering how to be able to find the person who could support some of these people. And I don't know that he actually got promoted, but he definitely got a seat that he loves and made the people around him better and grateful, because I wonder how common that is in many teams, that you feel like you've drawn in one particular genius and somebody doesn't feel like they fit, and everybody would love to be able to have somebody doing something a little bit different to help the whole team.
Right. Well, and I love the idea that it's like people go, well, I guess I just shouldn't be a lawyer. It's like, no, there's all different kinds of ways to be a lawyer, even in that firm. And I honestly believe, like the guy that went in for his performance review, I don't think the people that he worked for understood. I mean, obviously they didn't. There's different roles and different jobs for people there. And too many people go, I shouldn't work at a church because I'm not like this, or I shouldn't work at a law firm. And we always say it's not the industry, it's the specific role you're fulfilling there. And go to the people that you're working with. And like Karen was just saying, like, brand yourself. Say, hey, I'm the judgment support person. How can a judgment and support person help this firm be more successful? And start by rebranding yourself where you are, rather than thinking you have to go out and quit your job and do something else, because maybe it's just the kind of role you're doing. I love the idea that we all have a brand. And this is the first time this has come up. Karen just wrote me this note. I think that our working genius is a lot about our brand as an employee, as a worker. And I think that's why those 15 labels, like I'm the discriminating ideator. And I can like start explaining myself to people with that brand and saying, hey, how can I use my discriminating judgment ideation in this role? Tracy?
It's so crazy. I think back to when I was in college, and man, this would have been such a gift. I think about those Auburn students and what a gift you gave them to come out of college and say, hey, this is my brand, and now I know what lane I should be in. That's huge.
You know something? Another young woman came up to me. Boy, they have bright, nice students there. And she came up to me and she said, okay, I'm an ID. She's my type. And she said, my job is I'm going to be helping manage a retail store. And so what do you have to say to me? And I was like, oh gosh. And I thought, okay, if that were me, I said, you should talk to the person who's hiring you and say, hey, if you're interested in my thoughts and ideas and using my judgment, then this could go really well. But if you already know exactly what you want and all you want me to do is to do the things that you tell me to do. And she was like, oh yeah, that would be terrible for me. I said, now you know the conversation to go have. And maybe that person will go, I hadn't even, in fact, most likely they're going to go, I haven't even thought of that. They're going to manage her differently. They're going to go, hey, I want you to help figure this out. But if you don't know that, you just walk in and it really is a crapshoot. My first job out of school was the best job ever, they said. And if they had said to me, we want you just to do whatever we tell you to do and do it perfectly, don't make any errors, and really, you're not going to have any input into what we ask you to do, I would have probably said, thank you for the offer. I'm going to be a failure. You know, I learned it the hard way. I've recovered, but I don't think people should have to go through that to figure this out.
You know, it's kind of an interesting this has come up several times, but it's an interesting conversation for sort of entry-level work. And with a few of the examples we're giving are people straight out of college or straight out of grad school, where it's usually less welcomed for you to do wonder, invention, or discernment work. Usually early on in careers, people are fairly happy for you to do some galvanizing, enablement, tenacity. So I'm curious to hear you respond to that, because that gal at the retail store probably doesn't get to invent what the products that are going to be on the shelf, right? And she might not get to reinvent and discern, some of the corporate branding. So how do you think about that, Pat? What's the scope or the amount of that work they should be thinking about?
I've been thinking about this recently, Beau, that you can use all of the different geniuses in different contexts, right? Like you can invent, gosh, who was I talking to recently? And they said, yeah, my job doesn't look like invention, but I can invent within the context of what I'm trying to do.
Yes.
So you're right. She doesn't have to come up with all the products to be an inventor. The woman can say, I want you to come up with better ways to market, or better ways to organize the store, or better ways. So we can apply our geniuses in ways that are not so stereotypical. And everybody can galvanize, everybody can enable, everybody can have tenacity, but we need to put it in the right context. So it's not black and white, like, hey, you're an inventor, so you need to go work at a company where you're coming up with a brand new product from scratch. We can all, especially in those entry-level jobs, bring the gifts we have into a certain role. Because otherwise it would seem so much more like, oh, I'm never going to find that perfect job. Well, there's lots of different things to wonder about and invent around and discern and to galvanize around and to enable and to finish. And so we just need to go into that and figure out how to put those to use.
That might be my favorite 2 minutes I've ever heard on this podcast. I think that is so clarifying. And what it reminds me is how much my own perspective about my work matters. Because I can go into doing some more tactical work with the mindset of, oh, this is a drag. I wish I was writing books. Or I can say, oh, I get to go create something that will matter. And the truth is, I really believe you, Pat, that in every role, in every industry, all 6 letters are needed and can be used.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I love inventing a new way to do something somewhat tactical, but at least I get to go, ooh, I get to think about this fresh, And even in a think tank, or even in some wildly creative industry, there's a need for a T that can finish their creativity. So I really do think it's not about it's not even just about the function. It's about the micro role you play within the context of that function. And here's the thing: we have to start by saying, I deserve. Deserve sounds like entitlement. No. It's like I must put myself in a position to have joy and energy in my job, because that will make me more successful. It'll allow me to contribute more. It'll give me more self-esteem. It'll put me in a better position later in my career. Never settle, unless you absolutely have to, for a job that's not the right job for you, because you will find that you will regret that very quickly. And misery and burnout are not something that God intends us to experience in our work. All right, fun conversation, really important for people out there. And I want to thank you guys all for helping here, Karen, Matt, everybody. And I want to say thank you to our listeners. We love talking about Working Genius, and we'll talk to you next time on the Working Genius podcast. God bless.